Thanks for joining us at the 2025 Zero Emission Fleets Reconnect Conference. These conference presentations are proudly brought to you by Plug-in BC. All right, Jason, thanks for coming down and chatting with us today. We always look forward to Zero Emissions Fleets Reconnect. It's a fun day to get to connect with people. It, to me, always feels like every single year that passes, at least some portion of the technology that we're talking about has changed radically and is now completely, different than it was last year. And so with regards to fleet electrification infrastructure, you're coming to us, you're part of BC Hydro. With the rate of fleet electrification accelerating here in BC, how is BC Hydro preparing to meet the increasing demand for charging infrastructure, and specifically for commercial municipal fleets? Because we see that as a kind of underserved portion right now, and that's only bound to increase as time goes on. So how is BC Hydro preparing to meet that increasing demand?
Yeah, it's a really good question. It's pretty timely. There's a lot of things happening at BC Hydro, and they all play nicely with electrification, especially with EV charging and fleet management as well. So a couple of the key things we're working on, we are building out infrastructure. We have a very large capital plan to do that. We have an increase in supply. We know, as it stands right now, there's not sufficient capacity to support growth, and that's why we have what we call an integrated resource plan that triggers new opportunities for supply. And then we're looking really seriously now at expanding our energy efficiency portfolio. So where we don't need to necessarily, meet capacity demands, can we help customers reduce their needs as it currently stands, use our energy more efficiently to improve our opportunity to serve, future growth. Yeah.
And when you're looking at, almost from a top-down view of the kind of spread, you've got personal use and commercial use. Do you identify any trends in the commercial municipal fleet kind of growth that have surprised you or are interesting to you?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think we've seen a huge amount of progress on municipalities, certainly, and some of the public sector. In some ways, I think a lot of that's driven by their own climate goals, right? And the opportunity, given their fleet turnover, to look at fleet electrification projects. So I think maybe what I've been pleasantly surprised about is the volume of those projects and applications that we're working through with our fleet program, and the motivation and the enthusiasm we're seeing in that sector. It's been really great. Yeah.
And, you talked about climate goals and, municipalities, all sorts of jurisdictions up and down the ladder are starting to set those. I'm curious, one thing that people are, some people tend to worry about when it comes to electric vehicle charging and infrastructure is, can the grid keep up with demand? What measures are being taken at BC Hydro to kind of ensure reliability going forward as more and more people, plug their vehicles into the grid? Those concerns are only going to mount. So what kinds of steps are being taken at BC Hydro to help mitigate that?
Yeah, there's two things. Definitely an increase in supply. That's what I talked about with our integrated resource plan and our call for power that just went out for new renewable sources. So that's from the capacity side. But then in terms of grid resilience and reliability, we have a $36 billion capital plan that was announced. And that really is about how do we make sure that our current assets and our infrastructure is intact, but also expand, right? And so part of that is for electrification. It is for load growth. It's looking at everything from substations, new substations, transformers, poles, the whole work of BC Hydro and infrastructure is all related to that capital plan. And so that's really preparing us well for the future and, especially in EV charging and the growth we're going to see there. Yeah.
And, this is a question that I've heard some people ask, and, I feel like some people are not afraid to ask it, but they're kind of reticent to ask it because they don't want to sound like, they don't want to sound silly. But I do think this is a fair question to ask because a lot of people are wondering, is there enough energy in the grid? And it's not always, the answer isn't necessarily going to be, a straightforward thing, but could you talk about, in the electrical grid, where that power comes from, how it gets to where it's going, and whether people should be concerned or worried whether or not there won't be enough power?
Yeah, I think that the capital plan I mentioned builds out that infrastructure, right? When you're talking about capacity, That's why we have an integrated resource plan. And that's why we've recently awarded 10 renewable energy projects in the province to support that growth and capacity. What's particularly impactful to BC Hydro is not necessarily capacity, and we're going to build out that infrastructure or distribution. It's the demand. So it's that instantaneous power requirement on the grid, and that's where we have other products that we're looking at to help manage that sort of demand side management. Looking at, can we help customers reduce their peak loads? Can we shift peak so that we're not impacting the grid and stressing the grid on those high peak periods, which are typically winter heating months in the evening, right?
And in terms of a utility perspective, one thing I do want to ask about as well is what are some of the biggest challenges that BC Hydro is facing when it comes to supporting widespread fleet electrification? Are we talking regulatory concerns, technical concerns, financial constraints, or any of these things kind of slowing down that expansion of infrastructure?
Yeah, I mean, it's not a surprise, right? Like the current climate, there's a lot of uncertainty on the regulatory side and the policy side. Coming to events like today at the Reconnect is really impressive because you see there's still a huge amount of commitment among industry to keep moving forward. I think the regulatory side of it is definitely creating some waves of uncertainty in the industry. Economics are always a challenge. I think the technical problems are starting to get solved more and more. Right? I mean, we're seeing so much advancements in fleet electrification technologies, vehicle technologies, battery capacity and range. It just keeps growing and growing, right? So, those are starting to unlock some of those challenges. And certainly there's other opportunities we're looking at to help customers manage that, the costs and the impacts of fleet electrification. Yeah.
And I also want to touch on managing demand, load growth, that kind of thing. A lot of fleet operators, especially, one of the people I always like to bring up is this imaginary fleet manager who's a little bit reticent about moving his fleet over. So this imaginary fleet manager or this fleet operator might be worried about demand charges and the impact of high power charging on electricity costs, right? What strategies is BC Hydro implementing to help fleets manage these kinds of costs while ensuring this stability?
Yeah. Yeah. So there's two components to that. One would be rates. I mean, there is no current EV rate, right? It's definitely something on our radar, and that's something our regulatory team is working on in terms of the rate structures and demand charges. But what's really interesting to me in the fleet program is we have all these complementary program offers with BC Hydro right now. One is called demand response. So we help work with a customer to manage their charging, to reduce that demand, and we actually pay for those events because it helps us too. And the other thing that's really cool to me is our energy storage incentive. So we're starting to work with fleet operators now looking at battery storage solutions. They get the benefit of potentially reducing their demand and their power requirements at site. We get the benefit of working with the battery to help manage the grid loads, right? And so these are really where we need to go. We have to look at our fleet programs and projects as collaboration and partnership with our customers, not just we're going to get you plugged in, good luck with your project, right? And that's where I see this whole evolution of fleet electrification happening.
And I think that's a good dovetail for kind of what I want to touch on now is, going back to this imaginary fleet operator who's a little bit reticent. They might not know where to start. What kinds of resources does BC Hydro offer to folks who are, curious about the transition, who have been maybe told that they have to do this transition? What kinds of stuff is on offer to help people navigate this entire transition?
Yeah. Yeah, so our EV fleet program offers include incentives for infrastructure and pilot projects, but I think the biggest thing that we offer in that program is what we call an EV Ready Fleet Plan. And that's a study. And so this has now been offered since June of 2022, almost 3 years. It's paid dividends for customers. There's no real obligation other than, you put in a bit of money and we put in a bit of money, we get you a study. And that study gives you an understanding of the opportunities, what would work, what doesn't work, and the economics, right? And so when I come upon a new customer that might be reticent, they're not quite sure where to start, number one, we can help guide you through that process. There's a huge ecosystem at BC of support, consultants, OEMs, everybody out here to help you. But do the study. Like the study is going to give you the information you need to really understand what's possible and what that looks like operationally.
And can you go into a little bit of what this study actually covers?
Yeah. So basically, we help support a consultant to work with a customer, and the consultant will do a fulsome analysis of their fleet. They'll look at all the metrics associated with the fleet operations, the use cases, and duty cycles, and then they'll map out a suitability assessment where can I replace those vehicles with EVs? What makes sense operationally and what makes sense economically? And then it goes beyond that to look at a charging plan and an infrastructure plan to support those EVs and their fleet operation. So it's a fulsome study that basically, I like to say, it's a business case, right? It's going to give you all the numbers you need to make a decision. Yeah.
And casting our eyes into the future a little bit here, is there any big kind of technology, I don't want to call it a paradigm shift. I feel like that gets used a lot when maybe it doesn't need to be used. But are there any big changes in tech that you've got your eye on over the next, say, 5 to 10 years that could really change the way that all of us interact with the power grid?
Yeah, I think this is where we're starting to tread into that area with storage and demand response. So demand response is, can BC Hydro work with you and coordinate activities on your charging, making sure your vehicle is operational? I think this is where these programs are going to evolve. Of course, there's things like vehicle to grid. A lot of our teams looking at those opportunities too, where vehicles could be used as energy storage and those types of things. So, especially in the medium heavy duty commercial space, it's pretty nascent, right? There's still a lot of technology evolution happening. We're looking at all kinds of charging technologies with megawatt charging opportunities for commercial trucks. Maybe inductive charging is also on the table, right? There's just lots of opportunities to explore. Yeah.
And kind of just a final, opportunity here for you. I always like to open the floor at the end to folks to see if there's anything that you want to, put out there that you feel is important for people to know, about BC Hydro, about the work that's being put in to making sure that this transition is as smooth as, possible. What do you want people to take away from this conversation?
Yeah, I feel like I probably sound like a broken record, and maybe all of us at BC Hydro do a little bit, but it's come talk to us, like, as soon as you can. Even if you're just conceptualizing and looking at an opportunity, that's what we're here for. And we can really help educate and inform you on what the process is. And so where we've seen some pitfalls, and challenges is where customers come to us and they've built a charging infrastructure. And now they're struggling with, getting things connected and they've gone so far down the road without having an engagement with us where we could have supported them through that process, right? Or maybe done a study. And so that whole concept of early engagement, all the utilities in North America say that, but it's a really important point.
All right, Jason Scultety, Senior Key Account Manager of Fleet Electrification at BC Hydro. Thanks so much for coming down and making some time for us, chatting with me. I always find it interesting to hear, utilities aren't exactly, I think, things that people really think about until it's time to pay the bill.
Sure.
But I always find it interesting to actually kind of dive into a little bit about what goes on behind all of that stuff that I think a lot of people take for granted. So thanks for taking the time to chat with me, and hope we talk again soon.
I appreciate it. Thanks very much.
Make sure to subscribe to our channel for more updates on fleet electrification and other sustainable transportation solutions. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time on the Go Electric Fleet Show.